He had billions in the bank, power at his fingertips, but all Ethan Carter really wanted was someone to treat his disabled son like a human being, not a burden. He never imagined that someone would be a struggling waitress in a roadside diner, and that she would change their lives forever. Welcome to Mr. Jacob's Stories, where every tale reminds us that compassion, not wealth, changes lives. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more heartwarming stories that will stay with you long after the screen fades. Now, let's get into today's story. Ethan Carter was a name most people recognized. He was a billionaire, a man whose business empire stretched across industries. Yet despite his wealth and power, there was one thing Ethan couldn't control: his son, Oliver. At 10 years old, Oliver had already faced more challenges than most children could ever imagine. Born with cerebral palsy, he struggled with mobility, relying on others for even the most basic tasks. But what hurt Ethan the most wasn't his son's condition. It was the way people treated him. The pity, the awkwardness. It was as though Oliver was invisible to everyone except Ethan. That afternoon, however, was different. It was Oliver's idea to visit a small, family-run diner on the outskirts of town. The kind of place that smelled of coffee and warm pancakes, the kind of place where people didn't care about who you were or what you had. Just a simple, cozy spot where Oliver could feel like a normal kid. Ethan was reluctant, but seeing the excitement in Oliver's eyes, he agreed. Inside the diner, the warmth of the room contrasted sharply with the chill outside. The staff bustled around, serving plates of steaming food, and the soft hum of conversation created an atmosphere of comfort. Ethan ordered a black coffee, and Oliver picked pancakes, his favorite. As Ethan began to answer a call from his assistant, he barely noticed the quiet struggle Oliver had with his fork. Just as frustration began to cloud his son's face, a soft voice broke through. "Need a hand?" Ethan looked up, startled. The waitress standing before them had a genuine warmth in her eyes, her smile bright and welcoming. Her name tag read, Sophie. Without hesitation, Sophie knelt beside Oliver. "Do you need some help?" she asked softly. Oliver nodded shyly, and Sophie began cutting his pancakes into manageable pieces. Ethan watched, momentarily distracted from his phone call. There was something unspoken in Sophie's kindness. She wasn't treating Oliver like a fragile child. She was treating him like a person, like anyone else. As she continued to chat with Oliver, making him laugh between bites, Ethan felt a stirring in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Something about this moment was different. This waitress, this simple act of kindness, was shifting something deep inside him. Little did he know, that simple diner stop would change the course of all their lives. Sophie Lane had always believed in the power of kindness. She didn't have much, but she gave what she could, whether it was a smile to a stranger or a helping hand to someone in need. At 25, Sophie worked long hours at the diner, juggling double shifts to support her mother, Linda, who was battling cancer. Life had never been easy for Sophie, but she wore her challenges like a badge of honor. Her mother had always taught her the value of compassion, no matter the circumstances. When she saw Oliver struggling with his pancake, Sophie's heart went out to him. His small hands trembled as he tried to lift his fork, but the effort only frustrated him more. Without thinking, Sophie knelt down beside him, offering a hand. "Would you like some help with that?" she asked gently. Oliver, startled by the kindness, nodded shyly. "Yes, please." With patience, Sophie cut his pancakes into small, manageable pieces and began feeding him bit by bit. As she did, she chatted with him, trying to make him laugh. She didn't notice at first, but Ethan had put down his phone and was watching them. His eyes, usually so focused on the world of business, were now fixed on something far more personal. Sophie's sincerity was something Ethan hadn't encountered in years. It wasn't just the way she cared for Oliver. It was the way she saw him, not as a burden or a challenge, but as a child who deserved the same kindness any other child would get. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of relief, as though the weight of the world had been momentarily lifted. When Sophie finished helping Oliver. She turned to Ethan, offering him a smile. "Is there anything else I can get you, sir?" Ethan, still lost in thought, stared at her for a moment. There was something about her, something genuine and unpretentious, that made him feel a strange connection. It wasn't her appearance. It was the way she made Oliver feel seen. "No, thank you," he replied, his voice a little quieter than usual. "You've done more than enough." Sophie gave a warm, polite nod before walking away, leaving Ethan to reflect on the unexpected moment. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, but Sophie didn't want anything. She simply gave. As she moved around the diner, laughing with customers, her energy filled the room in a way that was contagious. Ethan was drawn to her in a way he didn't understand, and for once he didn't mind that feeling. He looked at Oliver, whose face was now lit up with a genuine smile. "She's really nice, isn't she?" Oliver said, his voice full of admiration. Ethan nodded slowly, his mind turning. Sophie had done something for Oliver that no one else had. She made him feel normal. The days that followed were quiet for Sophie. Life continued as usual, long shifts at the diner, trying to balance her mother's medical needs and struggling to make ends meet. But there was a change in the air, a shift she couldn't quite place. Every time she entered the diner, she couldn't help but wonder if Ethan Carter would show up again. He hadn't returned since that first day, but she found herself thinking about him more often than she cared to admit. Meanwhile, Ethan couldn't get the image of Sophie out of his mind. There was something different about her, something that intrigued him. He wasn't used to people treating his son like Sophie had. She didn't see Oliver as someone to be pitied or as a burden. She simply saw him as a child, deserving of kindness and respect. And that was rare. He had business meetings, investments to track, and deals to close, but his thoughts kept wandering back to Sophie's warm smile and the way she interacted with Oliver. He found himself wanting to know more about her, who she was, what her life was like, and what motivated her to be so kind. The following week, he couldn't stay away any longer. He returned to the diner, hoping to see her again. When he walked in, Sophie was serving another table. Ethan hesitated, watching her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. She moved through the diner with ease, her laugh ringing out like music, making the mundane feel special. When she finally noticed him sitting at the same booth where they had first met, she flashed him a warm smile. "Back for more pancakes?" she teased gently, her eyes twinkling. Ethan chuckled, the tension in his chest easing. "Something like that." "I'm glad to see you again," Sophie said as she approached. "How's Oliver doing?" Ethan felt a surge of gratitude. Sophie remembered Oliver. In a world full of distractions, her focus on his son meant something deeper. "He's doing great, thanks to you," Ethan replied, his voice softened. Sophie smiled, though she didn't quite understand the full depth of what Ethan was saying. "It was nothing, really. I'm just glad he's okay." Ethan studied her for a moment. "It's rare to find someone who's genuine. You're rare, Sophie." Her cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment, but she just shrugged. "I do what I can." They exchanged a few more pleasantries before she moved on to take care of her other customers. Ethan watched her as she worked, noticing the way she interacted with everyone around her, her kindness never wavering. It was clear that Sophie wasn't doing it for any recognition. She was just being herself. As the diner grew busier, Ethan's thoughts drifted. He had a decision to make. He wasn't sure why, but he felt compelled to ask Sophie something that would change everything. The following days felt like a blur to Sophie. Her mother's condition had worsened, and her shifts at the diner were longer than ever. But no matter how tired or stressed she felt, she couldn't help but think of Ethan. It wasn't just the way he had looked at her during their brief exchanges. It was the way he seemed to care about Oliver, how he valued her kindness, and how he made her feel as though she mattered beyond just being a waitress in a diner. It wasn't until the next Thursday afternoon when Ethan returned. As usual, he walked in with his quiet confidence, scanning the room until his eyes locked with hers. Sophie felt a flutter in her chest as he made his way over. "Good afternoon, Sophie," Ethan greeted, his voice warm, but there was something else in his tone, a subtle urgency. "Hey, Ethan," she smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "What can I get you today?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment before speaking, his gaze intense. "I'm not here for the pancakes, Sophie," he said slowly. "I'm here to offer you something." Sophie paused, her heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about you, about Oliver, and what you've done for him, what you've done for me, without even realizing it. You don't just do your job, you truly care about people. And I want to offer you something more, something that could change your life." Sophie's heart raced, her thoughts swirling. "Ethan, I don't know if I understand." He smiled gently, noticing the confusion in her eyes. "I want to hire you to be a part-time caregiver for Oliver, but it's more than just that. I want you to be a part of our family. You'd have flexible hours, you'd be well compensated, and I'd cover your mother's medical bills. No strings attached." Sophie blinked, processing his words. The offer was so unexpected that she didn't know how to respond at first. The relief of knowing that she wouldn't have to struggle anymore, knowing that her mother could get the care she needed, was overwhelming. But there was also a deep hesitation. She didn't know Ethan beyond the few interactions they'd had. She didn't know if she could trust him. I don't know," Sophie murmured, looking away for a moment. "That's a lot, and I don't even know if I could just walk away from the diner. I've worked here for so long." Ethan nodded. "I understand, but think about it, Sophie. You wouldn't have to worry about your mom's bills anymore. You'd be able to spend more time with Oliver, and I think he needs someone like you. Someone who doesn't look at him with pity, but with genuine care. I think you can give him something I can't." Sophie was silent for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Her mother's health was deteriorating, and Sophie had been juggling so much already. This offer could change everything for them, but it also felt like a leap into the unknown. "What about the diner?" Sophie finally asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "I can't just leave it all behind." Ethan looked at her steadily. "You wouldn't have to leave it all behind. You could continue to work here part-time, and I'd make sure you were compensated for your time. I just want you to have the option." Sophie's heart felt heavy. She didn't want to leave the diner, but the idea of securing her mother's future and providing better care for Oliver seemed like a dream come true. She had always worked hard, always tried to do right by the people she loved, but she couldn't deny that this was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. After a long pause, Sophie took a deep breath and looked Ethan in the eyes. "I'll think about it." Ethan's expression softened. "Take all the time you need, but if you decide to say yes, I'll be here, and I'll be waiting." The next few days were a whirlwind for Sophie. She had always prided herself on being a woman of practicality, someone who weighed her options carefully. But this was different. Ethan's offer felt like both a lifeline and a leap of faith. The thought of leaving the diner behind was hard to swallow, but the chance to help her mother, to give Oliver the attention and care he truly deserved, was equally compelling. Sophie spent every waking moment going over the details in her mind. Could she trust Ethan? Could she really leave the only job she had ever known? Would it be too much, taking on a caregiving role full-time while still trying to maintain a sense of normalcy? That night, she sat beside her mother's bed, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the room. Linda's health had worsened, and Sophie could see the exhaustion in her eyes. As she held her mother's hand, Sophie thought about her future. She couldn't keep living in constant fear that her mother's medical bills would bankrupt them, or that she'd always be struggling to make ends meet. "I've been offered a job," Sophie said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Linda turned her head, her weak eyes filled with curiosity. "A job? What kind of job, sweetheart?" Sophie hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking. "It's with a man I met at the diner. He wants me to work for him as a caregiver, for his son, Oliver. He's offering to cover all of our medical expenses, Mom, and he said I could continue to work part-time at the diner, too. Linda's gaze softened. You've been working so hard for so long, Sophie. Maybe this is the break you've needed. But you need to think carefully. What's best for you? For us? Sophie nodded, feeling the weight of her decision. I don't know. It feels like a huge change. But I want to do what's best for you, Mom. I want to be able to take care of you without worrying about every bill that comes in. Linda smiled, faintly, her frail hand squeezing Sophie's. You deserve that, sweetheart. And if this is the chance you've been waiting for, then you need to take it. You don't have to do everything alone. Sophie's heart ached, but the love in her mother's eyes gave her the courage she needed. She couldn't keep running on empty. It was time to make a decision. The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, Sophie found herself back at the diner. Ethan was already there, sitting at a corner booth with his usual cup of coffee. As she approached, his eyes met hers, and he gave her a small, hopeful smile. Have you made up your mind? He asked softly. Sophie took a deep breath, her voice steady. Yes, I'm in. I'll do it. Ethan's face lit up with a genuine smile. I'm glad. You won't regret it, Sophie. Sophie's first day with Ethan and Oliver felt surreal. It was as if she had stepped into another world, one where luxury and comfort were no longer foreign concepts but part of the everyday. Ethan's sprawling estate was a far cry from the cramped apartment she had shared with her mother, and Oliver's bedroom was a room filled with warmth, toys, and books that Sophie could only dream of. Despite the grandeur of the surroundings, Sophie's focus was entirely on Oliver. The moment she entered the house, Oliver's eager face lit up with excitement. He was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, watching the birds outside. He had grown used to people coming in and out of his life, but Sophie was different. She didn't pity him. She didn't look at him as a project. She looked at him as a child, full of potential. Hi, Oliver. I'm Sophie, she said, kneeling beside him. Your dad told me I'd be here to help you. Oliver grinned. I already know you, he said, with a mischievous glint in his eye. You helped me at the diner. Sophie laughed. That's right, and I'm going to help you again. What do you say we start with some breakfast? Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them interact. He had never seen his son so relaxed around someone else before. Oliver had always been guarded, and most of the caregivers they'd tried before never seemed to get through to him. But with Sophie, it was different. He could see how comfortable Oliver felt, and it made him feel a strange sense of relief. I'll leave you two to it, Ethan said, his voice low. I'll be in my office if you need anything. Sophie nodded and turned back to Oliver. So, what's your favorite breakfast? Oliver thought for a moment before replying, Pancakes. Sophie smiled, feeling a wave of familiarity wash over her. The same pancakes she had helped him with in the diner. It was almost like fate had brought them together. As the morning passed, Sophie settled into her new role. She helped Oliver with his morning routine, assisted him with his mobility, and played games to keep him engaged. It was clear to her that Ethan had poured his heart into creating an environment where Oliver felt loved, but there was still something missing. Sophie could see it in the way Ethan interacted with his son. There was a wall between them, a distance that only love could fill. Sophie wasn't sure if she could be the one to bridge that gap, but she was determined to try. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose. This job was more than just a paycheck. It was a chance to make a difference in both Oliver's and Ethan's lives. As the day went on, Sophie found herself connecting with Oliver in ways she hadn't expected. He was a bright and curious boy, eager to learn and full of questions about the world around him. Sophie answered each question patiently, laughing with him, and finding joy in his little triumphs. In the evening, as Sophie prepared to leave for the night, she was surprised when Ethan approached her. Would you like to stay for dinner? He asked, his tone casual but warm. Sophie hesitated for a moment. I don't want to impose. You wouldn't be, Ethan replied, his gaze steady. It's just, I'd like for you to stay, for Oliver's sake and mine. Sophie felt a knot in her chest. She had always kept her distance from people, afraid of getting too close. But something about Ethan's sincerity made her want to say yes. After all, they were both starting a new chapter in their lives, and maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to be part of something bigger. "I'd like that," she said, offering. A small smile. Ethan's face softened. "Good. It's settled then." As days turned into weeks, Sophie's role in Ethan's household grew. What started as a temporary arrangement blossomed into something deeper. Oliver had become more confident, more expressive, and Sophie felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known in years. But it wasn't just Oliver who was changing. Ethan, too, was beginning to open up in ways Sophie hadn't expected. Before, he was the distant, reserved billionaire who carried an invisible burden. He had walls built high around his heart, and for good reason. Sophie had assumed he was just another man of wealth, used to power and control. But over time she saw another side of him, one that was vulnerable, protective, and quietly kind. One evening, as Sophie and Ethan shared a quiet dinner after Oliver had gone to bed, they found themselves talking about things neither of them had ever expected to discuss. "I never thought I'd be in this position," Ethan said, pushing his food around his plate. "My life was all business all the time. And then, Oliver." Sophie nodded, sensing the weight in his words. "You've done well for him. He's lucky to have you." Ethan's expression softened. "I don't always feel that way. I thought money could fix everything, but with Oliver's condition, there's no amount of wealth that will give him what he really needs." Sophie took a deep breath, her heart aching for him. She had seen the way Ethan tried, the countless therapies and specialists he'd brought in, but no amount of wealth could replace the need for connection and love. "You're doing your best," Sophie replied, her voice steady. "That's all anyone can ask for." There was a long pause between them, the silence comfortable. Ethan looked at her, his eyes searching her face as if trying to understand something. "You really believe that?" he asked quietly. Sophie smiled, softly meeting his gaze. "Yes, I do." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Sophie had no idea how much those words meant to him. But what she did know was that they were both in the same place now, learning, growing, and trying to navigate life with an unexpected bond that neither of them had anticipated. As the weeks passed, things began to shift. Ethan started to involve Sophie in more aspects of his life, whether it was attending meetings about Oliver's care or discussing personal matters over dinner. She became an integral part of the family, not just as a caregiver, but as a confidant, someone Ethan could rely on in ways he hadn't allowed anyone to before. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, watching Oliver play, Sophie realized just how much things had changed. Ethan was smiling, genuinely laughing at something Oliver had said, and Sophie couldn't help but notice how different he looked. The tension that had once clouded his expression was gone. "You've made a difference," Ethan said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophie turned to him, surprised by the weight of his words. "What do you mean?" Ethan met her gaze, his eyes soft but earnest. "In Oliver's life, yes, but also in mine. You've shown me that there's more to life than just success and control. I've spent so much time trying to manage everything, but maybe I've been missing the point." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected Ethan to say that, but deep down she knew it was true. She had been teaching him, just as much as he had been teaching her. "I'm glad I could help," Sophie said, her voice quiet but sincere. Ethan smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I never thought I'd say this, but I think I owe you more than just thanks." It wasn't just the little moments that mattered anymore. It was everything. Sophie had become a part of Ethan and Oliver's world in a way that felt irreplaceable. Ethan's heart, which had been locked up tightly for so long, was slowly opening. He was learning what it meant to be present, to truly care, to love without the expectations of his wealth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink, Ethan found himself watching Sophie from the kitchen window. She was kneeling on the ground, playing with Oliver, her laughter carrying through the air. For the first time in ages, Ethan felt something stir within him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "Dad?" Oliver's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Why do you always look at Sophie like that?" Ethan turned, startled. "Like, what?" Oliver grinned, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "Like she's the best thing that ever happened to you." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was true. Sophie had changed everything. And though he hadn't said it yet, he knew. He cared for her deeply. She had become his anchor, the one person who had truly seen him and his son for who they were, not for their wealth or status. "I think you're right, Oliver," Ethan said softly. "She really is the best thing that's happened to us." Oliver smiled, his eyes lighting up. "I'm glad, Dad. I think she's the best too." That night, after Oliver had gone to bed, Ethan stood in front of Sophie, the weight of his feelings hanging in the air. Sophie looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "Is everything okay?" she asked, sensing the tension. Ethan took a deep breath. "Sophie, I don't know where this is going, but I can't ignore how I feel anymore. You've changed my life, you've changed Oliver's life, and I think I'm falling for you." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected this, never imagined that the man she had been helping, the man she thought was untouchable, would feel the same way. But here he was, vulnerable and open, confessing his feelings. I don't know what to say," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "I never thought I'd be in this position either, but I care about you too, Ethan. More than I've ever cared about anyone." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air thick with emotion. Finally, Ethan stepped forward, taking Sophie's hand in his. "Then let's figure it out together," he said, his voice filled with hope. Sophie nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Together," she agreed softly. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of clarity and purpose. Ethan and Sophie didn't have all the answers, but they were willing to take the journey together. They worked through their fears, their doubts and their insecurities, always supporting each other along the way. Oliver, too, blossomed in this newfound atmosphere of love and warmth. He thrived not just because of the care Sophie provided, but because he saw his father finding happiness, something he hadn't seen in a long time. Ethan had always been the rock, the provider, the protector. But now, he was learning what it meant to truly live, to love without reservation. One day, as the three of them walked through the park together, hand in hand, Sophie looked at Ethan, her heart full. She had never imagined this life, never thought she would find someone like him. But here they were, building something real, something beautiful, something that would last. "I think we've found something special," Sophie said, her voice light with contentment. Ethan smiled, his hand gently squeezing hers. "We have," he replied. "And I don't intend to let it go." Together, they walked into the future, ready to face whatever came their way, knowing that they had each other. They had built something more than just a family. They had built a life. And that was the greatest gift of all. And so, the story of Ethan, Sophie, and Oliver comes to a close, but their journey is far from over. From the quiet diner to the deep connection they now share, they've shown us that love and kindness can transform even the most difficult of circumstances. Ethan's heart, once closed off, has opened in ways he never expected. Sophie, with her unwavering warmth and care, has become more than just a caregiver. She's become a part of their family. And Oliver, in the midst of it all, has found the joy and laughter he so richly deserves. This story reminds us that sometime